Okay, we're going to pick up at slide number 7 now and talk about small group instruction, what actually takes place in small group instruction. So on slide number 7, you'll see a graphic illustration of the kinds of instruction you'll do in a small group. Specifically, this one would illustrate what would happen in a kindergarten or first grade class with a small group of students who haven't mastered all the kindergarten level skills. And so if you look at the left-hand side, you'll see a little box that says letters and sounds. You would start with the smallest unit of learning that the students need to work on. And so when I say letters and sounds, I'm referring to those phonological awareness skills that some students really struggle with in their early years. And so you may have in a group of students who are struggling readers, some students who really still need to work on those phonological awareness skills. And so what would that look like? Well, you would play maybe a game with them where you have pictures of things, and you say, a picture of a cow, a cap, and a log, and you would say which one of these pictures doesn't belong with the others. And of course, we hope they would say log because the other two start with a k sound. And so that would just be very brief, but very targeted to specific skills that the students need to work on. I have letters with that too because the National Reading Panel, in their summary of all the research about reading instruction methodologies, emphasized phonemic awareness, but they also made the note that when you although phonemic awareness is strictly oral and it becomes phonics when you add the letters, you strengthen phonemic awareness training and instruction when you do actually add the letters. And so with kindergarten and first grade students, it's very appropriate to sort of mesh those two things together. So although you might do a couple of minutes with a phonemic awareness oral activity just using pictures and no letters, you would also begin to introduce the letters. And some of those videos that you saw from the Barksdale Reading Institute that I showed you, or I posted on Blackboard, show what that instruction looks like when you start to add some of those letters. So you would do some word sorts there. And then that blends nicely into the next segment, which is letters into words. And so then you're actually doing word building. And so you use a segment of that time to do some of those word building activities. For example, you take a dry erase board, or you have the children use a dry erase board, and they write the word cat, and then you ask them to erase the k and change it to the letter that makes the h sound, and of course they get the word hat. And so you do a few minutes of working on actual word building, some word building instruction. And then the next segment is words into sentences. I always recommend that teachers in small group instruction spend some time dictating and actually helping students to sort of fit put all those pieces together so that they're building sounds into letters, into words, and words into sentences. And so it would be very appropriate here to dictate simple sentences like I see a cat, depending on the level of the ability of the children that you're working with. And then you have the next chunk of time in that small group instruction is actually authentic reading and writing. And what I want you to notice here is that although we've fit 4 pieces into this small group instruction, the largest component of time should always be spent in authentic reading and writing activities. What do I mean by that? Well, when you've assessed your children, some of the assessments that you'll do will actually give you a reading level for the children. Those of you who are familiar with Accelerated Reader understand that books, have designated reading levels. There are several systems you can use, and we'll talk about that in class for how you go about leveling books. But you want to find a book that's on the student's instructional level. Again, we'll talk more about that as we talk more about assessments. So authentic reading, you want them actually engaged in reading, and reading for meaning in particular, because after all, that's the whole point of reading instruction. It's not the skills are the means to the end, and the end is actually being able to engage in reading activity. So now let's look at the next slide. The next slide shows the type of reading instruction for most students, and particularly after the first semester of kindergarten, most students are ready to go fully into this format, into which you still have the letters into words, and then you have words into sentences, but you'll notice an even larger chunk of time is spent on authentic reading and writing. And so again, using leveled books. And when I talked a moment ago about authentic reading and writing, and what reading is, but writing is also important. And I think sometimes it's very appropriate with children to use your small group instruction time to help them to actually begin to construct their own sentences and to write their own thoughts down. And that's part of the literacy puzzle too. If you'll remember Marie Clay, and her famous quote, "If I say it, I can write it. If I write it, then I can read it." And so that's an important part of this piece. The next slide, on slide number 9, is a plan that you would use for students who are securely at or above grade level. And now you see the majority of your time, almost all of your time, would be spent in these authentic reading and writing activities. This is where teachers would engage in more guided reading formats. You would still have some phonics activities going on in small groups, small group instruction, and so you still want to use that time to develop skills that they're still learning to master. However, these folks really need they need less scaffolding than the other children do, and so you want to be very strategic in how you use that small group time. Now let's go to the next slide. Independent practice, as I said before, this is where you do literacy centers, okay? The teacher's goal is to monitor these centers, the independent practice activities. Teachers need to be very, very aware that whatever you're asking them to do, it needs to have limited teacher involvement. I mean, it needs to be things that you can do, that they can do without your help. So they're designed for independence. When you select activities to put in literacy centers, or that any kind of independent practice you want the students to do, they need to be designed so that they're maintaining skills that have already been learned. You never teach a new skill through independent practice or literacy centers. And again, the students need to be completely immersed in activities, so very actively involved in whatever they're doing. The next slide, we're going to talk for a couple of minutes about what's going on in the classroom, what it looks like when students are doing independent practice. The reason we do literacy centers is because not only is it giving them time to reinforce skills, but this is when the teacher is involved with small group instruction. So while she's working with one group of students, the other students are doing literacy centers. And what I've given you in slide 11 is sort of the typical notion of what it looks like in a classroom. You have an area for whole group instruction. In kindergarten, first grade, preschool, generally there's a story time or a rug area where the students come and sit. Not necessarily in all classrooms, or not necessarily important to have beyond even kindergarten. You can have the students sitting at their seats while you're doing that 15-20 minutes of whole group instruction. So this is what people generally think of, and you'll notice that there's a 20 minutes allotted for small group instruction, which means that while you're working with, say, Group A, Group B is doing some literacy center activities in one part of the room for 20 minutes, and then the groups literally rotate around the classroom so that each group has a chance to work with the teacher, and each group also has an opportunity to engage in whatever those independent activities are at the various centers or stations. The next slide is another small group option, and this one works very, very well with older students. And also, I always recommend this when teachers are first beginning to do small group instruction. You have your students seated in, clusters of seats, or pods or whatever you want to call them, so that they're heterogeneously grouped throughout the day. And if you remember, we talked about that. That means that if you can see on the slide, that the little yellow dots represent children who would be in one particular reading group. So let's say those are your struggling readers. They're not sitting with a group of struggling readers all day. That would not be beneficial to them. That would not promote social constructivism. That wouldn't help them to learn from their peers necessarily. So you've got them sort of randomly placed throughout the classroom, and then after whole group instruction, the teacher has her work table where she does small group instruction, and she literally calls the yellow group to the table. They work with her for 20 minutes. The other children at that time are engaged in various independent practice activities, and so you can have literacy centers at their tables. You can have baskets of leveled books that they can read while you're working with the other group, a variety of activities. And of course, then when you finish with yellow group, then you would call the next group. So the next slide, slide 13, sort of illustrates how that would work. So you can look at your time frame from 8:30 to 8:50. Group 1 or yellow group is with the teacher, and then the teacher at 8:50 to 9:10 would work with purple or gray, whatever color that is, group. And then 9:10 to 9:30, the aqua colored group would be with the teacher. And then 9:30 to 9:50, the pink group would be with the table. So you can kind of see how that works. The next 2 or 3 slides, you have small group rotation number 2. On slide 14, you can kind of see how that works. In this particular arrangement, you would have time for students to work in those dyads, working with a more capable reader, working with a less capable reader, and so on and so forth. And hopefully in your classroom, you'll have 3 working computers, and you have the students at least twice a week they would get to work with the computers, and then in the library area of the classroom. And then on slide 15, you see how what that would look like when it's charted out time-wise. And then the next slide, slide 16, option 3, shows. I put that one up there because one thing I like for teachers to think about is putting their teacher table in the middle of the classroom so that they can be in close proximity, or at least see all of the children and what they're doing while they're working with their centers. Okay, we're going to stop here. It takes a while to upload these videos, so we're going to stop here, and then when I get back with you, we will resume with slide number 18. So thank you.